Today I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about infatuation, lust even, about struggle, about self-reflection, about disappointment. No, I'm not talking about my marriage. I'm talking about the Wharfedale Dovedales.
Why wouldn't I wanna meet you? Why wouldn't I wanna hold you? Why? I've never been a believer.
Okay, so let's go over the anatomy of a Wharfedale Dovedale. What we have is a British big monitor type of proportions. I like to sit next to these things to show you guys the true scale of them. This is not a small speaker by any means. It's about 26 inches high without the stand, about 14 and a half inches wide, or about 17 and a half inches deep. So you've got a three-way design that is ported in the back, and it has a 10-inch woofer, it has a 5-inch mid-range, and both of those are Kevlar drivers, and then they have a 1-inch soft dome tweeter. And they took this tweeter and they put it in the Linton, and that's what became the Super Linton. So let's look at some of its electrical specs. So, its sensitivity is 89 dB. Its recommended amplifier power is 25 to 250 watts. Peak SPL is 112 dB. Its nominal impedance is 6.5 ohms. Its minimum impedance is 3.5 ohms. It lists as 36 hertz to 20 kilohertz, plus minus 3 dB, and the negative 6 dB point at 25 hertz. I'll have more to say on that a little bit later. But they weigh close to 60 pounds. They're kind of awkward to move around because of their bulk. I will have to say that. But hopefully you don't have to do that too much. They do come with a set of these grills, and these grills are magnetic. And what you can see is on the back, they're universal, so they can work on either one, even though the tweeter is offset. But they have this kind of chamfered edge around the outside of it. It's flared out. And they actually recommend that you leave these in for listening, which is what I did in my living room setup. But they basically just click in by magnets, like most things do. And they're rather attractive this way. And that's how I use them for most of the time in the living room, just to protect them and just to, do what the manufacturer suggests. So this Dovedale journey for me began about 18 months ago when I decided to put together a living room system. There was a system up there, it wasn't great, so I wanted to put something together that was a little nicer up there. And so I began putting together some electronics, and it came time to figure out what speaker to use up in that living room. So I had a couple criteria that were important to me in selecting this speaker. One is it had to look good. I have a very kind of cool mid-century modern 1955 house, and I wanted something that had that kind of retro vibe to it. Number two is I wanted it to be a fairly large loudspeaker because that was what's going to fill this fairly large living room space. So it needed to be something with probably some larger drivers. I didn't want to do a subwoofer in there. It also had to play well at lower volumes. So this was going to be a more casual system that was used to just play music in the living room for everyone to enjoy at lower listening levels. Down here, I play it relatively loud because that's what the Linkwits like. The Linkwits used to be up in that room, and they just want to be played loud, and it's not very good for the whole family. So that those were the major criteria for selecting a loudspeaker. Now, what I did is something that I don't recommend anyone do, and yet I did it myself, and that is I bought a speaker without hearing it. I know, it's stupid, but I did it. And I did it because, number one, I was infatuated with the way the Dovedales look. They have this awesome retro vibe that really works with the decor in my house, and I really love the way they look in that living room. I had read all the reviews. The Lintons were also a possibility, but the Dovedales came with that bigger woofer. The other thing I wanted this speaker to do was be good enough that it could take some electronics upgrades over time and reap the rewards of those upgrades. So that's why I ultimately didn't go for the Linton, but I went up to the Dovedale, was because I wanted those improvements to come through during that upgrade path. It was intended to be a long-term speaker for me, and so I got them in, I set them up, and first impressions were it had lovely resolution. It sounded very lush, but it also was very lean in the bass, and so I was a little disappointed in that. And so I thought, okay, they're brand new, they need to break in. So I set them up and just used them for the next 2 months without judging them too harshly. But ultimately, that bass leanness, it seemed to remain throughout my time with them. And it's a little puzzling to me because the specs say a certain thing, and I didn't hear what the specs insinuate. I'm not saying they're lying, but I have a feeling it is a different preference of bass presentation in the British sound versus the American sound. And us Americans like our bass, strong and fat, and maybe on the verge of muddy a lot of times, where the British like their bass tight and lean and crisp, and that's really what they were giving me. But a negative 6 point of 25 dB, I have a hard time believing that's what I hear in my room. It could be my room that is an issue, but I had the Linkwits up there. They played very well in the low end there. So I don't know what the issue ultimately was, but I tried all sorts of different combinations of electronics. I have a Class D amp up there now with a passive preamp. I had a integrated amp from Dovedale, another Class D with a Class A input stage basically, and that was probably the best combination, but only because with the tone controls I could pump up the bass to my liking. And then I also tried Prima Luna tube amplification on it, and none of those changed the ultimate impression of this thing and the way it presented that bass. So, ultimately, something came along that was better than the Dovedales in that living room environment. And the source that it came from shocked me, because I was not expecting this to usurp the Dovedales in the living room for the criteria by which I was judging these things. I just want to briefly go over bass, mid-range, and treble on this speaker. I've already talked about the bass a lot. It is tight, and there's very good definition, good tone, but it's really tight and not a lot of oomph. And like I said before, I think this is just a American versus British preference. That I didn't enjoy the bass as much as I do, a lot of other, American-made products, or there's quite a few that I think aren't quite as lean in the bass and tight in the bass as these. The mid-range is quite lovely. The mid-range has beautiful, wonderful resolution without being, hyper etched or anything. It's very lush mid-range, which makes vocals sound really fantastic. Brass sounds lovely. The treble is also, very extended without being in your face at all. So it's not like a B&W sound at all. It's very even, and it blends very well with the mid-range. Now, the way the Dovedales present music is a bit of a sticking point for me. So to me, I'm coming from the Linkwits down here, which have a very sort of expansive presentation, right? The sound comes from, the whole front of the room is emanating the sound. It is not coming from a point source. It is definitely more of a they are here in the room with you rather than a you are there presentation, if you know what I mean by that. What the Dovedales do is more of a you are there presentation. However, it's more like you are viewing the venue from a window, and you are not there, but there is a sort of viewing plane that you see everything through. So they don't present images or any sound very much outside of their boundaries. So you're kind of restricted to, you know, this kind of size of that box, and then if you complete the rectangle, that's sort of the window with which you view all of these recordings. And that is not a presentation that I truly loved. I am definitely someone who prefers the they are here presentation. And part of that, I think, is a little bit of what they can do off axis. It may have to do also with, you know, the way the cabinet terminates at the edges and the diffraction that creates. That's speculation entirely. I don't know for sure. But they seem to restrict the way they presented the sound to just the boundaries of their cabinets. And, you know, they were also a little trickier on setup than I hoped they'd be. So when I brought them down here is where I think I've truly gotten what they're really about. And then I got their sound staging precision. Within that window that you're viewing, there's a lot of precision in there. There's a lot of layers and depth, but it is restricted to that boundary. And ultimately, it was quite enjoyable. What happens is, it's funny. You'll start a piece of music, you know, and it sort of warms up on you over time. That presentation, you start to get used to it, and it starts to become more enjoyable. In the beginning, it sounds like almost like the music is trapped in the box and not able to get out. I don't know if you've ever heard that on some speakers, but some speakers have a very boxy presentation. I wouldn't necessarily say these are boxy, meaning the cabinet, I don't think, is contributing a whole lot to their sound, but they do have this sort of restriction to them that limits their ability to throw images very wide. And ultimately, you know, that is one of the things that I could never shake through different combinations and through different setup procedures, especially in the living room, where that setup is constrained to certain parameters of it being a living room. Down here, even, you'll notice I'm looking the other way. The speakers are on the opposite side of the link widths because they need a bit of boundary reinforcement that they can't get when their backs are facing the shoe choir, just based on the circulation of the room. So they like to be, you know, they're probably, their front baffle's probably 3 feet from the wall behind at the moment, and they just need a little bit of that boundary reinforcement to help out the bass. Compared to being more out into the room, they get even lighter in the bass, which is not something I was looking for. They also, if you push them really close against the front wall, they don't even gain that much bass that way, and you lose a lot of image depth if you have them too close. So, you know, they're kind of fussy on setup in that way.
Kisah henti di
By now you must be thinking, God, is this guy an idiot? He's the first one to ever do a negative review of the Wharfedale Dovedale. And I don't think of this as a negative review of the Dovedale. If anything, it is a negative review of myself and the choices that I made to get to this point. It's really not about the Dovedale being deficient. It's more about compatibility and the fact that these just aren't the speaker for me. I think there are plenty of people who would buy these and just love the heck out of them. Because there are a lot of really good upsides to these that could please a lot of people long term. Ultimately, I think they probably would appreciate better electronics than I have currently. And I'm guilty, I think, in this case, of overbuying for my situation. And really, the living room didn't need such a high-end speaker. And it's high-end, and to get the best out of it takes more careful setup than the living room allows. So that's on me. That has nothing to do with any deficiency in the Dovedale itself. So, if I had to do a pros and cons list, I'd say, on the pro side is they look fantastic. And that, I was enamored by their looks from the very beginning. They have a lot of resolution and good amount of warmth so that it doesn't become clinical. I think, the British have a way of doing that very well, threading that needle. I will put the tight bass as both a pro and a con, depending on what your taste in the bass is. I got the best bass out of them down here, in a smaller room, closer, well, they're about the same distance from boundaries as they are upstairs. But for some reason, they just pressurize this room a little bit better. The bass is a little fuller down here. I think that's one of their cons is they take very, very careful setup. So if you do not have flexibility in setup in terms of where they're placed relative to boundaries, you may not get the best out of them. And for me, a con is their presentation of music and their sound staging is not something that I prefer. And I think I've already gone over that. But I think ultimately I have found something that's going to replace these, and the Dovedales are going to go up for sale. I hope you enjoyed this review and listen to some more music today. Bye, guys.
Betty came by on her way. Said she had a word to say about things today. And falling leaves.
Said she hadn't heard the news, hadn't had the time to choose way to lose, but she believes.
Gonna see the riverman, gonna tell him all I can about the plan for a lifetime. If he tells me all he knows about the way his river flows and all night shows
time. Betty said she prayed today for the sky to blow